Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Keith Hiscock, Dr. Keith Hiscock today. And I've known Keith for several years. We usually meet up at conferences and things. But a little bit of info about Keith before we start. Keith was born and brought up in Ilfracombe, spending sunny days at various beaches prawning with his father, or taken to Tunnels Beach by his mother after school, where he could be seen torturing sea anemones. He was given a copy of Collins' Pocket Guide to the Seashore when he was 12 or thereabouts, and there was no going back for him. Ilfracombe Library had copies of Philip Henry Goss's books, which were a revelation, corals in British waters and at Ilfracombe. There followed excursions to shores that Goss had described. Keith learned to scuba dive at university, and underwater observations largely took over. And in 1969, he did his first dives at Lundy, finding the sunset coral for the first time in British waters. His PhD was on the effect of water movement on the ecology of sub-littoral rocky areas. Really interesting and complicating subject, I would think. Researching underwater marine life was a new field, and so he could make his mark, and he secured jobs with the Field Studies Council and then the Nature Conservancy Council, where he led the Marine Nature Conservation Review of Great Britain. After that was all over, he worked with the then director of Marine Biological Association in Plymouth to develop Marine Life Information Network. Now retired and an associate fellow of the MBA, his wanderings on the shore and underwater continue to add knowledge of what is where and how it works. This morning, Keith is going to tell us what to look out for now that the spring season is approaching. So over to you, Keith.
Thank you very much indeed, Jan. I'll start to share my screen now. There we are. You've got all the information you need for my obituary there. Yes, good morning, everyone. And hopefully this morning I can give you a little bit of an idea of my take on Spring has Sprung. And of course, I gave that title before I started to put the slides together. And I realized that there's a lot more going on through the year than just during the spring. All of these images here you'll see again during the presentation. So, spring has sprung. We all know when spring has sprung because we look at our gardens, we go walking in the woods, we see that all the daffodils are in full bloom. And this morning I looked out on my garden to see that the magnolia was beginning to come out, which is always very nice. So this is the sort of signs we're looking for when we're thinking about spring in our gardens, out in the wilds on terrestrial areas. It's much more difficult to actually track what's going on the shore and in the sea. On the shore, because really we need to go down at low spring tides, and underwater, of course, we need decent visibility and the opportunity to spend 40 minutes with 40 kilos of kit on, wandering around diving. So it isn't so easy in the sea, and there's a lot more to learn and there's a lot more to record. So let's just go on to the next one and say something about the rest of the year, because there are events. Yes, March, April, May, which is what I'm calling spring, the meteorological spring on the shore. But of course, appearances and disappearances happen all through the year. So you've probably been seeing dog whelk eggs since November being laid by the dog whelks here. And of course, these are egg capsules. They contain a very large number of eggs, which grow into crawl away young. No larval stage, just crawl away young. Variable blennies, they've only been known from British waters since 2007, when they were first observed in Plymouth Sound. They're a warm water species, they're a range extension. They're not a non-native. They are native to the Northeast Atlantic, and they're now very well established in South Devon and South Cornwall and parts of Dorset. As far as I know, none have been seen on the north coast of Cornwall or north coast of Devon or the Isles of Scilly yet. But there are eggs from about June to August. So not a spring one, but, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to imagine the eggs here. This is a male, and the males tend to go dark when they're guarding their eggs. And these are the eggs laid in a fissure on the rocky seabed. Triggerfish, yes, you get triggerfish in North Devon and at Lundy. They usually turn up in about late June, July, and they're around until November. Warm water species present and breeding in the Azores, Portugal, don't breed in this country. Global warming, of course, or is it? First recorded in 1865 in British waters. So first record caught in lobster pots, 1865. They've been coming to us on oceanic currents for a very long time. And that's how they get here. They come in from the Azores, from Portugal, from the east coast of the United States on currents. Other things which fascinate me, but which are very difficult to see, because that sea lily stage of the feather stars is less than a centimetre long, the one that's bottom left here. Interestingly, the feather stars have claws which they use to attach to the seabed. The juvenile stage is stuck to the seabed, and it's like the sea lilies, which are so prolific in the fossil record. Molting aggregations of spider crabs. I really want to know if ever you find any of these, including the washed up shells. This is something that happens from July to September. I knew about it from Babbacombe and from West Wales. And then this last August, on August the 18th, I landed on the jetty at Lundy, looked over the side, and there were just masses of shells being washed up on the strand line. This picture was actually taken on August the 4th by the assistant warden and is a clip from a GoPro video underneath the jetty at Lundy. And so, although I found out that there had been videos of an aggregation of spiny spider crabs at Gannett's Rock in 2017, this was the first I had ever seen of or heard of an aggregation of spiny spider crabs. And of course, the mistake which people make is to assume that they're breeding. They're not breeding. They're there, strength in numbers, protection, to shed their shells and grow a bit more, and then head off for deep water where they do breed. So don't call them breeding aggregations, they're molting aggregations. But there we are, July to September, not a spring thing, but another event that happens through the year. And I'll come back to dead men's fingers, bottom right here, and talk about their dormant stage and what happens after that. But here you are, let's get back to springtime and let's get back to North Devon. So if you go down on a really good low spring tide, you'll see this northern kelp or rough striped kelp, Laminaria hyperborea. It's got a stiff stipe, it's easily broken, and it's got lots of red seaweeds growing on the stipe. But most importantly, at this time of year, it's getting rid of the old frond. The old frond has been eaten by blue-rayed limpets. It's had sea mats growing on it. It's had hydroids growing on it. It's best got rid of, and a fresh new frond, which can photosynthesize more efficiently, can grow. And that's exactly what's happening here. You can see the manky old frond being cast off by the newly growing frond. Perennial species. Kelp is perennial, it's about 8 to 10 years old. This is also a perennial species, but you wouldn't recognize it as any particular species of seaweed. This was photographed on the 4th of January at a place called Firestone Bay in Plymouth Sound, and it shed all its fronds, or they've been eaten. This was taken on the 8th of March, not very long ago. And it might even be the same plant. It's growing on electricity cables which go across Plymouth Sound, and it might be the same plant, but I can't be sure. But it's now started to grow new fronds. And if you're collecting seaweeds to make your Christmas cards, then the time to do it is really sort of early April. 8th of March, you know, that's a little bit, they're not really grown properly yet. But after springtime, they'll start to get eaten, they'll start to have sea mats growing on them, they'll be looking pretty manky. So that's what a lot of perennial species do, is they shed their own old fronds and they grow new ones. Male fish do very well at looking after their babies or their eggs. So here we are on the 2nd of March in 2013. And you can see this shani and the nesting males guarding the eggs, cleaning the eggs. Underneath a boulder here, I've turned the boulder over and very quickly took a bit of the shani before he could decide that he'd had enough of being photographed and decide to move away. But you can see the dark color and the white lips, which are typical of a breeding and nesting male. So look out for these. I've been looking out for them on the spring tides on my local shore here this year, but haven't yet found any with eggs. Males do very well. They do very good work, and Tompot blennies are breeding from about now onwards, perhaps a bit later in the spring. And the males live in fissures, which they attract the females into to lay their eggs. And then it's the males that look after the eggs that keep them clean. And they keep them clean with this anal gland. So this is a gland which the males have, which actually is used to scrub the eggs clean to keep any sort of algal growth or whatever off. So you can see the shiny eggs, and you can see the male Tompot blenny busy cleaning them. So it's males doing good work. And some of you will be finding worm pipefish, and the males do good work. The pipefish are related to seahorses. They don't have a pouch like seahorses, but the males hold the eggs on their bellies before they hatch. So this is a male worm pipefish on the 10th of March 2020. Disappointingly, I was on the shore on Monday, and I was expecting to find worm pipefish at Arreston Spit, which is just down the road from me. And I usually find them under almost every boulder, but there weren't any this time, and there weren't any butterfish. So I'm not sure what's going on there. You know, let me know if you've seen an absence of species that you expect to see. Another one which you'll probably see, particularly if you go over to Lundy, because they're very common on Lundy. 9th of April 2016, shore clingfish, a male, I suspect, again with its eggs, looking after its eggs under a boulder. So lots of egg laying going on, lots of males guarding eggs and keeping them clean until they can hatch. So there's actually a lot of seasonal growth which kicks off in April or May. Now, this is in Firestone Bay, which is at the entrance to the Tamar in Plymouth Sound, and on the 4th of May in 2012. We don't always have good years for these Tubularia indivisa hydroids, but when we do have a good year, they're absolutely spectacular. You can see that they've got these brilliant red polyps. They're athecate hydroids. In other words, they don't have a sheath that goes over the polyp. The polyp is always bare. It doesn't have a protective sheath. It has a tube, but this is to its disadvantage. Catch them while you can. If you are diving, you do see them on the shore occasionally, but really it's something you see diving. If you see them diving, get your picture quick. This is another one. This is a related species, Ectopleura larynx. Of course, a lot of these names have changed. This used to be Tubularia larynx, and you know, your identification guides are probably going to be out of date. And every time I do a PowerPoint presentation, I have to check that the names haven't changed. It used to be the case that the common names were poo-pooed because they changed, and the scientific names would provide consistency in referring to a species. Now it's the scientific names which are changing all the time. So Ectopleura larynx, same sort of thing, spring outburst here on the 25th of March in 2006 on ex-HMS Scylla, the warship that was sunk in Whitsand Bay. But take your pictures quickly, because the sea slugs are going to come and eat them. So you'll see that this is 2012, it's the 4th of May 2012, so these pictures aren't taken on subsequent days. This is on the 5th of May. Oh, sorry, it's a different place. It's a slightly different place. It is the subsequent day in 2012, but it's a slightly different location. And these sea slugs are very specific on what they feed. Their diet is very specific to particular species. And these Coryphella lineata, they're now called Fiordia lineata, love to eat the polyps of these Tubularia indivisa hydroids. So no more fantastic polyps, just a bare tube. The polyp has been eaten and the sea slug has used the energy so gained to lay its eggs cheekily on the now dead stalks. So, you know, there are all sorts of things going on in the spring, including spring growth, but also including the outburst of some species which are taking advantage of that spring growth. Keeping with sea slugs appear and disappear. Some, like the Archidoris pseudoargus sea lemon, you can find all the year round, and they produce egg masses like this, which quite often puzzles people. Quite often we get inquiries saying, what's this, what's this? I found this ribbon-like stuff, and it's the eggs of these sea lemons. Pluribranchus lives on mud. I caught this one at West Hoe when it had just started to lay its egg mass, and it's this sort of curled egg mass, which again, at low spring tide on a muddy surface, you'll quite often find them. And again, people post them and say, what's this? But what interested me was that I got this picture and I watched the sea slug, and it produced the rest of the egg mass very, very quickly, and then went off at a great rate of knots. So it's very quick to lay the egg mass, and it's very quick to leave the egg mass to its own devices. On the other hand, you've got this Doto fragilis, another sea slug here. See, it's very characteristic strata and these sort of tentacles on the front here. And these are present really all the year round. And the eggs are present for most of the summer. This is the 20th of May, and it feeds on Nematisia antenina, antenna hydroid, which is a very, very common species. And then it lays its eggs on the antenna hydroid. So, you know, this is something which you can see all the way through the summer, not just in the spring. I'm going to ask you, if you know if you'd like to interpret this image here, turn on your microphone and tell us what you think it is. No? Well, I was puzzled by this because I thought, sorry, someone going to shout out the answer?
Yeah, Robin will tell you.
I'm sure you got it sussed. Are we talking about one of the I can't remember the name, the egg-eating nudibranch species?
That's right. You know, it took me a long time to sort this out, because I thought that's a very small sea slugs to have laid all those eggs, and it seemed to be going away from it. It's probably the eggs of Aelidia papillosa with egg-eating Favorinus branchialis. So this sea slug specializes in eating the eggs of other sea slugs. And so it's probably been a naughty boy and been eating some of these eggs and is now clearing off. So again, 18th of April, lots of things happening in the spring, lots of sea slugs about, but probably a different suite of sea slugs each year. Some sea slugs, it's been known since the 19th century, will disappear for 30 years at a time. You know, they'll not be seen for 30 years and then they'll come back. So when you see sea slugs, or if you don't see sea slugs, don't assume there's been some disaster. It might just be that the conditions haven't been right, the larvae haven't been brought on currents coming in the right direction, the right food source hasn't been around, or we don't know what, but certainly don't panic. A classic one for a spring occurrence is the cuttlefish coming in. So it used to be the case, I don't know whether it still is, at the Bristol Underwater Photographic Club. All of a sudden at the end of April, they'd start to exchange emails saying, anyone seen the cuttlefish yet? Are the cuttlefish in at Babbacombe yet? And then eventually, perhaps the last week in April, the email would come, the cuttlefish are in, there are masses of them. And this is actually taken at Babbacombe in Tor Bay. You can see the female, she's the rather dowdy one, a dominant male who's obviously guarding her, and what I call an apprentice male, one that's just lurking in the background, perhaps learning what he's got to do when he actually finds a female of his own. So this is a picture taken at Babbacombe, and you know, it is a fabulous place to go to see cuttlefish breeding. I haven't seen very many of them in North Devon. Now, if any of you dive or know divers, do ask them if they see any sort of cuttlefish aggregations. You know, this is a real cuttlefish aggregation. There are lots of them at Babbacombe, but I never see aggregations in North Devon. I never see aggregations at Lundy, but I do see eggs in North Devon. And I know this is in June, so the eggs are around for quite a long time. So these are the black grape-like eggs, which the cuttlefish lay, and they actually black because they've got cuttlefish ink in them. Sometimes the cuttlefish actually run out of ink and the eggs are clear, they're transparent. This is on a pink sea fan in Coomartin Bay. Pink sea fans are very unusual in North Devon. We haven't got very many of them. I don't think there were ever a lot of them on the North Devon mainland coast. There used to be a lot more at Lundy, but they were collected as souvenirs in the late 1960s, early 70s. And they're, hang on, sorry, I'm seeing messages which I don't want to see. So this is a pink sea fan. I'm very keen to know how many there are in North Devon. Whether, you know, on a dive you can see 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. I'm very keen to see larger numbers at Lundy as well, because they not only were collected in the late 60s and early 70s, they also suffered disease much more than other parts of the Southwest in the early 2000s. So this is really about cuttlefish though, and this is about look out for these grape-like eggs and look out for aggregations of them. Here's a really fascinating one to me. It's a sort of who'd have thought it type picture. And this is a nesting wrasse. So this is a corkwing wrasse. Again, it's changed its name. This is in Bovisand Harbour. It's on a north-facing overhanging piece of rock. And if you're going to look for corkwing wrasse, and you can find the nests intertidally, but if you're going to look for them diving, that's what you need to look for. And there are lots of such surfaces in North Devon. You've got a north-facing coast, you've got overhanging rock, and therefore you've got rock which never sees the sun. And so if there are corkwing wrasse nests about, you should be able to, if there are corkwing wrasse about, you should be able to find the nests. And the nests are quite complicated. I mean, that's the size of a bit bigger than a grapefruit, a bit smaller than a football. And it's quite a complicated nest. It looks like it's made mostly of coralline algae, corallina, mesophyllum, and so on. But that's just the outer surface. That's the armor plating, as it were. The inside is lined with soft red seaweeds, and of course is the place where the male corkwing, this is a male corkwing, tries to lure females in to lay their eggs. And that was work which was done by Jeff Potts and published in the Journal of the Marine Biological Association at Wembury. So this is to look out for. I'd be fascinated to know if anyone does find corkwing wrasse nests in North Devon mainland or indeed at Lundy. I don't think there'll be many at Lundy because there aren't that many inshore territorial fish at Lundy. And I'm going to be very cruel here. You're going to hate me for this. Why aren't there many inshore fish at Lundy? Too many seals. And what do seals eat? They eat fish. Well, that's my personal opinion. But you don't find that many wrasse compared with places like the offshore reefs at Plymouth, where there are no seals. I'm going to be cruel again now, because when I've been down at Wembury, where of course they've got an extremely good marine centre, very good wardens and volunteers who take children in a normal year out on the seashore and show them all sorts of interesting things. You don't need to show children rare species and so on. They're fascinated by perfectly ordinary things like what limpets do and sea anemones and so on. But the being cruel bit is that I went down with them one day and I said to the wardens, I said, oh, look, there's something really interesting over there that you ought to point out to the children. They'll be fascinated. And they said, what? We can't see anything. Well, what is it? There's nothing to look at, no. And I thought, you don't know, do you? You don't know that that is the nest of a corkwing wrasse. So you do find them intertidally. Again, a north-facing shore, an overhanging rock, and this outer coating of coralline algae. And I've been to Wembury Beach specifically looking for corkwing wrasse nests intertidally, and I've found as many as 13. So I've counted as many as 13 intertidal corkwing wrasse nests. There are no seals at Wembury. What there are, though, these days are people potting for wrasse to sell them on to the salmon farms in Scotland. And this photograph here was taken before that wrasse potting took off as a highly lucrative commercial activity. So look out for corkwing wrasse nests and look out in the spring. This is 29th of May, so we're still just about in spring. I've spoken to Paul Naylor, who watches at Wembury much more than I do. I mean, he's just up the road and he's in the water nearly all the time. But he says from late April onwards, they're nest building. There are other things going on. European stingwinkle laying its eggs, the same sort of eggs as dog whelks. It's another type of whelk. Here it is. I'll show you another picture in a minute. It looks really, really grotty here. But here's a picture taken at Lee Bay of a nice clean specimen, so you can see what a stingwinkle looks like. And again, these are capsules full of eggs which are going to develop into crawl away young. These stingwinkles were enormously affected by poison, by tributyl tin anti-fouling paint, which was popular in the late 1970s and in the early 80s up until 1986, when it became obvious that the anti-fouling paint being coated on the hulls of vessels was having an effect on a much, much wider number of species, including particularly dog whelks and other whelks, which disappeared from some areas. Oysters, oyster shell thickening, the larvae were killed by the tributyl tin anti-fouling paint. It took quite a long time for the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food to get the message, but at least this time they did get the message. And in 1986, tributyl tin anti-fouling paint for small vessels was banned. It wasn't for large vessels, that came later. But in the Crouch Estuary, which of course is a very popular sailing area, they didn't have any pre-1986 records of what lived in the sediment. And the point that I was making was that a lot of observations of what goes on in the spring are serendipitous. I wasn't planning to go on a dive to see the starfish spawning at West Hoe on the 22nd of May 2012, but I came across these two spiny starfish up on their arms, tripod-like, and one was producing white stuff and one was producing orange stuff, and they were about 5 meters apart. So I presume the one on the left is a male and the one on the right is a female, and those are going to produce sperm and eggs, and those are going to go off into the plankton and make larvae and make babies. So, as I say, I hadn't planned to see this. And if I'd have used the literature, I would have been looking at a different time of year. This is towards the end of May. And if I look at the Plymouth Marine fauna, I'll see that they were nearly ripe on the 7th of March. The artificial fertilization made it on the 10th of March. And then ripe in mid-May 2014. So same sort of time of year as this. Large specimens in the tank, each gonad, active sperm, 29th of April 1926. So a bit of a spread, whether they do it once or whether they do it lots of times, who knows? But it's just something which it's pure luck if you see. There was a more systematic study in Ireland, but again, it doesn't correspond to what I was seeing in May 2012. Sunny days during July and August 1978. So perhaps they have events all through the summer. It's a prolonged spring and summer. It's a prolonged period. I don't know. There's not enough observations. And my favorite little beast of the last few years, a spiny lobster, a crawfish. Now, just for a scale, this red sea fingers branch is a little bit smaller than your thumb. So a little bit smaller than your thumb. And so this is a very small spiny lobster. Now, yes, it's the 11th of April, yes, it's the 11th of April 2015. It's not a spring settlement. That's been there for some time because they start to show themselves in the spring. So that's my excuse for putting up this picture, is that they start to show themselves from the holes which they live in, the fissures which they've settled in. And this is what they're doing towards the end of their days in the plankton. This is a screenshot from a paper or a magazine article which I published in the November 29 issue of British Wildlife. It's a drawing by Jack Sewell. And you get the larvae. Obviously, they hatch towards the end of the summer. This is a larval stage, and they're 130 to 150 days in the plankton, during which time they'll molt 10 times and get bigger and bigger each time. Well, that's a long time. That's plenty of time, for instance, for larvae to come across from Brittany to southwest England, or to go from Lundy to Pembrokeshire, or to go from Lundy to North Wales. So the larvae are in the plankton for a very long time, and that's very important because they actually settle in late summer. Sorry, they're probably produced the previous winter. They settle in late summer when they're about 21 millimeters in length, and they hide away in fissures, cracks and crevices. They're probably out at night foraging. They're probably going to molt at least 2 times before they get to this size. And then they're going to carry on molting, and they're going to take about 8 years before they reach sexual maturity. They should be, because they settled. Sorry, I missed out part of my story. We started to see these little ones poking out of holes in 2014 in South Devon. I know that there was a record from Lundy and a record from Skomer in 2007 because I saw them. But in South Devon, since 1999, when I started regularly diving out of Plymouth, I had not seen a spiny lobster underwater. And all the old boys hadn't seen them since the early 70s in diving out of Plymouth. And then all of a sudden we were seeing lots. And once they'd had a chance for a few of them to grow up, we were seeing up to 20 in a dive. So they disappeared after being exterminated by overfishing, and they disappeared for 30 years or so. So again, these long-term changes occur in the sea. Obviously, the loss of the spiny lobsters was due to overfishing. They were exterminated on a local basis. Still, you know, all through that period since the 1960s and 70s, they continued to catch them by netting off West Cornwall and in the Isles of Scilly. But off South Devon, no. At Lundy, they continued to be present off Lundy, and they were caught. Lundy is now a no-take zone around the whole of Lundy for spiny lobsters. Taking them is prohibited. And so people like Jeff Hewlin have been busy trying to tag them, which isn't easy, to see whether they catch them again and whether, you know, what sort of size the population is. I do hope that Ilfracombe Sub-Aqua Club members will keep their eyes open and report back how many they're seeing, where they're seeing, how big they are, and pick them up and turn them over and see if they've got eggs. That's really important, particularly for the ones which started settling in 2014. So coming on to the plankton as we work towards the end of the presentation, too small to see. Look at this size. I've converted these to millimeters. 0.2 millimeters is a scale there. So they're tiny. Only a very few species of plankton are big enough to see with the naked eye. And I'll mention that again in a minute. So this is a picture from the Plymouth Marine Laboratory diatoms, absolutely beautiful. Too small to see? Many of you will have heard of maywater. Fishermen have known about maywater since the 19th century at least, because it tends to clog their nets. Well, what you can see here are not the actual planktonic species, but the gelatinous sheath that they create around them. So they have this gelatinous coating, and here's a picture where those globules of gelatine are much clearer, and that's to protect them, particularly from viruses. When plankton bloom, they probably bloom for about a particular species will bloom for about a month, and then they'll disappear. And you think, they've used up all the nutrients that they need. Very often it's because of viruses, it's because of viral infection that they die off. So the gelatinous sheath helps them to protect them. But in the case of this Phaeocystis, sorry, I haven't used a scientific name, Phaeocystis, it very likely is lack of nutrients. They rely on silica and so on. And the bloom will last for about a month. So this is 26th of April, 2015. This is mid-May, 2013. You can expect divers to start complaining about the maywater coming in and them not being able to see very far from about the end of April. And then come the end of May, it should all have cleared. So we do get these spring plankton blooms, and this is the one which is most conspicuous. Here's another one, but this is what my diving colleagues call streaming blobby snotters. And you can see why they're called streaming blobby snotters. Now, this is Coscinodiscus. It's most likely Coscinodiscus walesii. And this is one which you can see with the naked eye, about the size of a full stop. But again, it's making gelatinous sheath, is making gelatine or slime to protect it, probably from viruses. So this is the Eddystone on the 2nd of April 2008, just to demonstrate what us divers have to put up with. But it's not just us divers that have to put up with stuff, because this is that Coscinodiscus mucus, which gets wrapped around all sorts of marine life, including these pink sea fans. And it picks up silt as well. So this is the mucus, but you can see it's quite silty water here, and the silt sticks to it. I don't think the sea fan is particularly distressed by being entangled in this mucus, but this wouldn't have happened, let's say, 80 years ago, because Coscinodiscus is a non-native species first detected in British waters in the 1950s. It almost certainly came in ballast water, in ship's ballast water from the Far East. So a non-native species which is doing no good at all. So yeah, so April, May time, some plankton blooms are happening, and some of them actually adversely affect divers' visibility. All things bright and beautiful. I've said to you that spring is the time to get your photographs of all things bright and beautiful, and I collect your seaweeds to press for your Christmas cards and such like. The jewel anemone is absolutely spectacular. This picture taken on the 7th of May on the left here. They look absolutely beautiful. Don't try and take pictures in the autumn. This is on the 14th of November. And in summer and autumn, they're much more likely to be closed up than to be open like this. Now, I'm not quite sure why, whether they're feeding and they've got enough food by the time they get through to the end of the summer or the autumn, I don't know. But whether they're just being lazy or whether the food's not out there, so it's not worth their while expanding to catch food, because of course these tentacles are covered in stinging cells and they're catching plankton as it's swept past them in the current. So all things bright and beautiful in the spring, but come the summer and autumn, not necessarily. All things more bright and beautiful, late winter and spring. This is dead man's fingers. These are the polyps. You know, a gratuitously pretty picture of the polyps expanded from the white branch of the dead man's fingers. Again, this white branch is going to be about the size of your thumb. So 7th of May 2013, that's the time to get your spectacular photographs. But this is how they look in late November. Come late August, September time, they'll shut up shop. And very, very few of them will have their polyps expanded. And when they shut up shop, then this is what happens. This is a diatom film. These are algae growing on the surface. Sometimes you get hydroids growing on the surface. All sorts of stuff grows on them because they don't push it away. They haven't got any polyps expanded. And so this is on the 23rd of November 2020. And you wonder why they do it. Have they got enough food? Is it not worth their while putting their polyps out because there isn't enough food in the water, or what? I'd be interested to know what your explanation might be. And we can find out more. You can find out more. So if you're curious about what you're seeing in terms of spring outbursts or spring growth, you can use things like the Plymouth Marine Fauna. That's accessible online. And here, for dead man's fingers, Oceanum digitatum, I've highlighted that one from the Mewstone on the 20th of December 1926 gave off eggs during the night. So this is the time of year when they start to expand their polyps again. So have they been busy all through the autumn making babies, and then they're letting off eggs during the night in the laboratory, that is, but a little bit of a clue there as to what their seasonal cycle is. But better still, you might find papers in journals and occasional reports. This is Richard Hartnell's paper on, again, the annual cycle of dead man's fingers. A lot of scientific papers are now available free access. That's a requirement for a lot of journals now. So in fact, it's the authors that have to pay to publish, and that's how the journals make their money. There's still quite a lot of papers which you won't get access to, or you'll be invited to pay $25 to look at it. You could usually find a free source. So this is the annual cycle of Oceanum digitatum, which is quoted in Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is quite often a very good source of information on the biology of marine species and on seasonal cycles and so on. Another very good source comes from the project which I helped set up in 1999, the Marine Life Information Network. And a spin out from Marlin is the Biological Traits Information Catalogue, because information on sensitivity, which is what Marlin is all about, comes from traits. How long does a species live? How fast does it grow? When does it settle? When does it reproduce? What's its distribution? You know, all of those are the sorts of traits which help us to understand how threatened species are, and whether an event where perhaps they all disappear matters, or whether it's something that just happens with that species every so often. So again, you can use biotic as your source of information. So those are sources of information. And of course, that's all to do with spring outbursts, spring events, big and beautiful, etc. But of course, there's another interpretation of spring, and it's spring and it's spring tides. And I just thought a little bit of, you know this already, of course you do. Spring tides, they come from the Old English springere, meaning to rise up or spring up. They've got nothing to do with the fact that it's March, April, May. And this is a screen grab that I got some time ago. Some of or the best low tides of the year are in the spring. So earlier this month, on Monday, the 1st of March, we had at Ilfracombe a predicted 0.4 metre tide. Now that's very good for Ilfracombe. And there was high pressure over the top as well. And high pressure will push down the tide for another 30 centimetres, up to another 30 centimetres. So if you've got a predicted low tide and you've got high pressure, you need to be out there. You need to be looking to see what you can find. Around here in Plymouth, we had a similar sort of very low tide and a similar high pressure, but I was actually disappointed that the tide didn't drop lower. So low spring tides, the chance to find rare and interesting species, nothing particularly to do with spring, although you can see here, this is the 31st of March, and you can see that the Laminaria hyperborea, which are well and truly out of the water, are shedding their fronds. So you can see the new frond growth, the bright yellow growth here. And this is at Tunnels Beach. And some of you will know and be fed up with me doing this, that I encourage you to go and find the place where Philip Henry Goss first discovered, new to science, the scarlet and gold star coral. So if you look at this description, September the 16th, I think it was 1852, spring tide, and the water receded lower than I've seen it since I've been here. What perhaps Goss didn't know, and I found out from the Hydrographic Office a very long time ago, was that on that date in 1852, the predicted low water was a 0 meter tide at Ilfracombe. So it dropped right the way down to the lowest spring tide level, chart datum level. And so Goss was looking at low spring tide. With luck, he didn't have a swell running, because I'll explain that problem in a minute. But the whole concavity of the interior was so smooth that I could find no resting place for my foot in order to examine it. And I reckon this is the precise concavity which Goss found the scarlet and gold star coral for the first time, new to science. You can find it. You just basically go over the end of the ladies' bathing pool, the eastern side, where you access it from the beach, or you come up from where the old swimming pool used to be and walk along the shore to get to the tunnels. You walk along the sandy strip, which goes away from the wall of the ladies' bathing pool, and you turn left and you climb over the rocks. They are quite rugged, they are quite difficult, and you come to this long gully, which Goss describes. And this long gully, the problem is that scarlet and gold star corals live in surge gullies. They like surge gullies. So if there's a swell running, you're likely to have some difficulty. You can come in from the back and you can climb down over here, and you can do what I'm doing here and poising myself and counting about 300 scarlet and gold star corals in here. Now, if there's no swell running, if it's a really good low tide, then you can wade through here. I will give you a warning. Right here is a hole. You will fall down the hole. You will get wet. So be very, very careful. And what would be really nice is if you haven't got the surge going up into this concavity, because this photograph was taken when the swell was running out, as you can see. So I'd be fascinated to know if you can find this cavity, if you can count, rough count the number of scarlet and gold star corals in it. But I think that you'll be going back to exactly the same place that Philip Henry Goss found the scarlet and gold star coral in 1852. Sorry, that was a bit of an indulgence on my part, trying to encourage you to look at what for me is a favourite species. So finally, happy hunting. Here's a picture taken on the 23rd of March 2012. You'll probably recognise Chris Mandry. This is at Chain Cove. I do have pictures which you can line up this particular surge gully with Lantern Hill in the background, and just sort of basically use your skills at line of sight, transit marks to find this particular shady gully. And you will find Devonshire cup corals, you will find scarlet and gold star corals, and doubtless you will find a lot more of interest. So happy hunting to you. Do make a record of what you find and which you think are basically seasonal occurrences or seasonal happenings. And thank you.